The year is 1952. The USSR has just made its Olympic debut at the Summer Olympics in Helsinki, Finland. Just 7 years after the end of World War II in 1945, the Soviet Union, which suffered roughly 27 million casualties, sent a large delegation and finished second in the medal table, with 22 golds and 71 total medals, just narrowly behind the United States. This display of athleticism was not previously possible under the former Tsarist regime, since athletics in Russia were largely the exclusive pastime of the aristocracy, landowners, and wealthy bourgeoisie. The Bolshevik Revolution laid the foundations for a Russia that would grant the majority of its population the potential to go into sports, with the support of the newly established Soviet government. Soviet athletics were once considered to be under the totalitarian control of the Big Red Machine. However, even Western scholars have repudiated this one-sided analysis. Soviet sports were not just restricted to the USSR, and even expanded into the rest of the socialist bloc, many of whom produced world-famous athletes and brought prestige to not just their own countries, but to the sport itself. The Stalinist line of spreading socialism by example had not only worked in industrializing the Eastern Bloc, but included the spread of institutions capable of creating elite athletes. None of this would have been possible without the October Revolution. Under the Tsarist regime, the phenomena of organized recreation and sports was limited for centuries by the lack of available time for all but the leisure class, and organized sport only began to gain momentum in the 19th century. Despite this, the early 20th century Russian Empire still saw about 46% of members of sports clubs in 1914 being composed of working-class individuals and students. It was also the case that some sports clubs were funded by employers and municipalities in order to divert the masses from participation in political life and the revolutionary struggle, and these powers therefore did not impose any special obstacles to public initiative in this direction. Despite, or perhaps due to this ambivalence, late Tsarist sport culture still lagged behind Western Europe and America at this time. Even in sports like soccer, the first league was only organized in Moscow in 1910. By 1918, Soviet power was growing, and the party could highlight Lenin's clear direction to uphold the correct view of the physical education of the masses as a means of obtaining the harmonious all-round development of the individual. Within a few short years, this became a central aspect of education. Quote, "Today, physical education has direct practical aims. 1. Preparing young people for work, and 2. Preparing them for military defense of Soviet power." In proportion that socialism, quote, shortens the working day and raises the people to a new life, creating such conditions for the majority of the population which will enable this new all-round development. However, in the earlier Soviet Union, there was still a strong aversion to bourgeois supremacism. In 1924, the USSR received an invitation to participate in the Olympic Games, but refused, launching a massive sport movement within the country. The USSR had already established the Red Sport International, called the Prolet Fizkult, in 1921, and hosted the Spartacade and other events instead. On the other hand, the Tsarist Empire had been participating in the Olympics before World War I. While the model of privately owned, competitive, and professional sport was not the norm in the USSR, the 1920s also saw a fervor that accompanied a great military victory. Therefore, Soviet sport was to take the offensive. And in the words of a party resolution on sport, all sports committees, the Komsomol, or Young Communist League, trade unions, and party organizations were to spread sport to every corner of the land, to raise the level of skill, and, on that basis, to help Soviet athletes win world supremacy in the major sports in the immediate future. The Spartacade and Workers' Olympics in this period are said to have surpassed the early Olympics in grandeur and showmanship up until the 1936 Berlin Olympics. The Spartacade was also not without its own controversies either, with the 1931 scheduled Berlin Spartacade being broken up by the police and having to be resumed in Moscow, 1,000 miles to the east. In 1937 Antwerp, the Popular Front policy also saw a joint Workers' Olympiad and Spartacade for the first and only time. Despite making these major advances, The August 1937 Communist International magazine still recognized that in major capitalist countries, even though 50 million workers were involved in sports, only around 500,000 belonged to workers' sports organizations. Although the foundations of what became the Big Red Sports Machine can be traced to the 1930s, the Soviet Union could not then have claimed status as a major sports power. Its achievements in particular sports, notably football, where the best Soviet teams were roughly equivalent to high-ranking professional teams in the West, and weightlifting, where Soviet athletes had set marks exceeding 22 of the 35 world records then in place, were notable. But in most sports, the Soviet Union lagged behind. In the immediate aftermath of the Second World War, Stalin was interested in joining the International Olympic Committee. When the time came for the 1952 Helsinki Olympics, Soviet athletes made an earth-shattering debut, earning 71 total medals, just behind the United States with 82. This achievement was remarkable, partly due to the fact that when athletes from Tsarist Russia competed in 1912, they finished in 16th place, earning a meager 5 medals. This remarkable success gave the Soviet Union immediate prestige, not just internationally, but even within their own country. For citizens of the USSR, this was tangible proof that the socialist system was able to produce disciplined, healthy, and physically superior people. It was evidence of the strength of the Soviet system, which had been materially translated into athletic success. Soviet athletics soon became an intrinsic part of the state institution. For Soviet leaders, every medal soon became a rebuttal of the capitalist system, the living proof of the success of the new socialist man. Between 1945 and 1954, sport became a centralized, living institution, not simply treated as physical education or recreation. Organizations across the country, from the smallest village to the capital city of Moscow, soon formed to provide citizens with free, readily available sports facilities. Around this time period, more than 30,000 athletic clubs and sports circles within the Soviet Union have been formed, many of them within small rural villages. 10 million people were regularly participating in sports, utilizing the more than 650 stadiums, 7,200 specially equipped sports grounds, more than 100 houses of physical culture, 350 aquatic sports stations, and 2,700 skiing stations. The centralization of a Soviet sports science was actually a point of criticism made by the Western nations, a point that we will touch on later. However, it cannot be disputed that the efficiency of this system produced world-class athletes on a near industrial scale. The Soviet Union's rapid rise as an Olympic superpower rested not only on political will, but on a sophisticated scientific foundation, established remarkably early. While the nation was still recovering from the devastation of the Civil War and was focused on building its industrial base, authorities recognized that systematic science would be essential for athletic dominance. In January 1933, by official decree, the P.F. Lesgaft Scientific Research Institute was founded in Leningrad as part of the Lesgaft State Institute of Physical Education. It would later become known as the Leningrad Scientific Research Institute of Physical Culture, becoming the true birthplace of state-sponsored sports science in the USSR. The institute quickly assembled an elite team of pioneers. Professor A.N. Kostovnikov, founder of Soviet sports physiology and a follower of academician L.A. Orbeli, established the scientific study of exercise responses, publishing landmark works such as the Essay on the Physiology of Physical Exercises in influential textbooks. Professor N.N. Yakovlev became the leading figure in sports biochemistry, beginning his work in 1931 and focusing on hormonal control of muscle metabolism, energy processes, and recovery. Professor V.K. Dobrovolsky advanced the field of remedial and therapeutic gymnastics and rehabilitation. What made Soviet sports science special was its intensely practical focus. Researchers did not just study theory, they tackled real-world questions surrounding training loads, nutrition, biochemical adaptation, and recovery. Their work directly shaped how athletes trained in the Soviet Union. By the 1970s, this system had advanced so far that Soviet scientists were developing cutting-edge doping detection methods, including radioimmunasty techniques for anabolic steroids. They even played a major role in building the anti-doping lab for the 1980 Moscow Olympics. Perhaps most impressive was how deeply science was woven into daily elite sport. Multidisciplinary teams traveled to the Spartakids with mobile labs, monitoring athletes in real time. Coaches, scientists, and athletes worked together in a constant feedback loop that kept pushing performance higher. Long before most Western nations invested seriously in sports science in any kind of planned way, the Soviet Union had built a centralized, state-funded system that treated athletic performance as a scientific and ideological priority. One of the most striking features of Soviet sport was its ruthless shift towards early specialization. In 1952, the average Soviet Olympic athlete was 32 years old, which was a reflection of the brutal demographic impact of World War II, which had wiped out millions of young men and left an older generation of survivors representing the country. By the 1976 Montreal Games, that figure had dropped sharply to just 23. Champions now had to be found and forged in childhood if the USSR wanted to keep dominating the increasingly fierce Cold War sporting arena. The cornerstone of this system was the network of specialized sports boarding schools, beginning in the early 1960s, with the first opening in Tashkent in 1961. These elite institutions combined academic education with intensive daily training. By 1978, there were 29 such schools across the country, housing over 14,000 carefully selected students. Children as young as 6 to 8 years old were scouted, tested for anthropometric measurements, coordination, and potential, then funneled into the pipeline. Selection was clinical and highly competitive because sports federations set minimum age limits for certain competitions, while doctors and scientists monitored growth, puberty, and workload to reduce injury risk. Young athletes lived away from their families for years, training 6 days a week under professional coaches. Alongside the hard physical training, students also got a serious education in Marxism. Through regular Komsomol classes, they learned socialist theory, built strong collective discipline, and developed a real sense of duty to the motherland and the socialist cause. Crucially, this education instilled a deep feeling of collective pride. Young athletes were taught that their achievements belonged to the whole team, the people, and the socialist system, rather than to chase individual, selfish glory, like in capitalist sport. The Soviet state was genuinely proud of these boarding schools and held them up as excellent examples of what socialism could achieve. At the same time, Soviet scientists and coaches did not turn a blind eye to the demands placed on young people. They actively studied youth physiology in scientific journals and conferences, carefully examining how training loads affected growing athletes and how to best balance top performance with healthy development. The results were impressive. These schools provided top coaching, great facilities, and a total focus on sport. They continuously produced wave after wave of outstanding young talents who were disciplined, highly skilled athletes who were ready to represent their country and carry the red flag with pride on the international stage. This intelligent focus on youth development became one of the biggest strengths of Soviet sport. By investing early and systematically in the next generation, the USSR stayed among the world's top sporting powers for decades. This was clear proof of the power of socialist planning. Wrestling was one of the best examples of Soviet sporting strength. From their very first Olympics in 1952, Soviet wrestlers took over both freestyle and Greco-Roman, piling up dozens of gold medals and world titles. Unlike in the West, where most wrestlers, especially Americans, were still true amateurs who had balanced training with college, jobs, or part-time work, Soviet athletes were fully state-supported. This allowed them to train like professionals year-round. While American wrestlers often relied on high-volume, live sparring, toughness, and explosive athleticism, the Soviets took a more methodical approach because they combined endless technical drilling with precise biomechanical analysis, periodized training plans developed by sports scientists, and the heavy use of general physical preparedness. The same approach worked wonders in another field, the field of chess. Before the revolution, chess was mostly an elite hobby, but the USSR turned it into a genuine people's game. After the revolution dramatically cut working hours, ordinary citizens suddenly had the free time to play. The state jumped on this, opening chess clubs in factories and schools, giving stipends to strong players, and making the game part of national culture. Soviet chess players enjoyed a unique privilege. They did not need to work outside of chess, as the state fully supported the pursuit of the game. The Soviet model stood in stark contrast to the individualism of the West. In the United States, players like Bobby Fischer operated in isolation, lacking the structural support provided to their Soviet counterparts. Mikhail Botvinnik and others developed a scientific, collective way of training that kept pushing the game forward. As a result, the Soviets dominated world chess for decades, winning 18 out of 19 chess Olympiads in which they participated in, between 1952 and 1990. Ultimately, the Soviet system showed the world that when people's basic needs are met and talent is systematically supported, human beings can achieve incredible things. The very visible success of Soviet athletes worldwide caused a lot of distress in Western countries. In time, the Olympics began to be used as a political weapon against the USSR. Accusations of child abuse were levied against the Soviet Union, claiming that they had taken young children and forcibly trained them in brutal conditions. Nothing, however, was further from the truth. Contrary to the Western imagination, Soviet scientists, physicians, and artists were noted to have worked tirelessly on the issue of child development in sports. Sports authorities implemented strict rules regarding the treatment of children, drawing attention towards their development in elite sports. Another common critique of Soviet sports was a perception that it was top-down focused, and thus elitist in character. This has been disproven even by Western researchers. Sports administrators consistently tried to bridge the gap between the youth and the elite, with programs designed to identify incoming youth and direct them towards elite programs. During Khrushchev's administration, sports boarding schools were created across the country to institutionalize this pipeline. In the Azeri boarding school, around a quarter of the children were peasants. This evidence directly refutes the attacks on the Soviet sports program, which was more often than not supportive of children's development and was more bottom-up than top-down. The Soviet Union's rise to a sporting superpower status was no accident. It was the result of a deliberate, integrated system of bold state policy that treated sport as a national priority. In contrast to the West, which produced athletes haphazardly and somewhat dangerously, without any direct attempts at lifting up the common man to the level of elite sports, the USSR was intensely focused on giving its people access to physical culture. The truth is, all of this was only possible because of socialism. By placing the economy and society under collective ownership and planning, the USSR could direct resources, scientific talent, and infrastructure towards developing its own people. That is the true legacy of Soviet sport. Not just medals, but the living demonstration that socialism creates conditions in which human excellence can truly flourish. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like and consider subscribing to see more from us. To support us directly, check out our Patreon. The link is in the description.